There's a famous philosophical paper on individual responsibility and whether or not we are morally responsible for any harm associated with climate change. The paper concludes no. You're welcome to read it or look at some analysis of it yourself. But the premise of the exercise seems flawed to me, with all respect to the exercise itself. The author argues, among other things, that if we accepted individual responsibility for all the things we may have a part in creating harm in, then we would basically need to live our lives motionless on the ground. And I agree that his conclusion is indeed absurd. But what's absurd isn't that we should logically come to such conclusions, but that there's a need to absolve ourselves as individuals from the reality that we cause harm. That there's ever a justification or logical reasoning that we should use to ignore and forget that all actions, even individual, do have consequences, and that we shouldn't consider this with all of our ventures. Fundamental truths like this are impossible to honestly wash away. All individuals of basically all species can be seen as causing harm from a certain point of view. If I exist as a tiny photosynthetic bacteria and I take a place beneath the rays of the sun, then I could, by some probability, have caused another similar bacteria to die off from competition for that energy source. Even with a wide, expansive area to receive that energy, the other bacteria could have ended up by mistake or chance competing for the same spot in a world of plenty. My successful procreation as a bacteria guarantees that potential for competition continues. Accepting this as a reality of the world is essential to acting in it, not rejecting the reality of our consequence via debating where a moral responsibility line lies. We're morally responsible for everything we do. That's why we should focus on what we actually need to live good lives and think more about the balance of our taking and giving. In my mind, we need to be strong enough to view ourselves as not merely creatures of good, but creatures of harm. Not to justify it away, but to take account as a reality of our decisions. Everything is a balance. The paper further tries to separate the responsibility of groups like governments from individuals. But governments are not magical creatures. They're a group of individuals. If you strain all the group think in the world, you'll typically end up with a few pervasive voices from individuals that are influencing the thoughts of many, many other people. If those same individuals deny their responsibility in favor of some mythical government group creature, then where does this logic terminate? Groups can be seen with both complicated and simple dynamics. I won't pretend I can accurately summarize them, but we've all seen and experienced them at play. Groups very clearly have hierarchical, follow the leader patterns, and government is a very complex group of groups. It's why I think in a lot of cases government is the last place we should try and solve our problems. You're never going to get what you want out of it because that's not what it's meant to accomplish, at least not at the scale of countries. Even though in reality we have almost everything in common at our core, in practice we find ways to represent ourselves as entirely different. That's a disaster of a world built too heavily on power dynamics and not enough on intelligence, wisdom, knowledge, and integrity. But I get the argument to put the responsibility on some group instead of ourselves. Those people are responsible. Those other people. But then you, as a hardworking, morally justified individual, should one day rise to have such a level of responsibility. And then what? What actions will you codify and exemplify? You didn't think any changes were necessary or required in your own life, and now you're in the position to mandate those changes on others. That's not leadership, and that style of change doesn't empower any group, government or otherwise, to be any force of positivity in the world. In reality, as an individual unable to live the life you profess others should live, then you've discredited the idea of yourself and the group you represent, no matter what positivity others might be spreading. To many outsiders, you as an individual are the group. Only by doing can we understand and through the actual collision with reality, figure out how to engineer solutions that meet human needs while also understanding what sacrifices they require we ask others to make. To me, whether we do morally relevant harm is an overly complicated attempt at justifying what we do. All of our actions have consequences and draw energy from a finite pool. Some pools are more finite than others and have different consequences that may be more or less impactful to the future of humanity or the Earth's ecology, which are respectively Tier 1 and Tier 0 infrastructure. When you go back to the basics, you see our choices to spend energy as more or less in line with the long-term survival of us as individuals, and yes, more importantly, as a species. We maybe don't emotionally feel that the species is more important than our individual selves until we see it in our children or the children of others, but it's there. Recognize that your life does cause harm, no matter how you live. That's a reality. Let's stand in our adult shoes and not look away from that. Because when we don't look away via justifications, we tend to be less ignorant. And where we're less ignorant, we're more capable to respond more consciously and thoughtfully to things happening. Then we can approach something closer to responsibility. Then we can develop solutions with more integrity that might even place us in a position of more influence, a more positively impactful influence. Or maybe not. Maybe we just end up living lives that allow us to deeply respect ourselves and our ability to be as moral humans as we can be, because we didn't permanently cast anything beneath our individual perception by assuming it wasn't also our fault. I think it's a better world. What about you?